If there is one argument against Star Wars we hear repeated over and over, it's that most media seem to hyperfixate on the same 10 people. There's a Skywalker or someone related to a Skywalker in almost every modern Star Wars show or comic, and after a while, people complain about the lack of variety in a galaxy as vast and as old as this one. That's why, when gifted with an original character whose creators have lovingly given us tons of content, we just have to talk about them. In today's video, we'll be looking at one of Star Wars' most infamous characters. Scientist, archaeologist, sassy, and honestly downright insane, the life and times of Dr. Chelli Lona Aphra are enough to fill several comic books. In today's video, we'll be taking a look at her messy, stressy life and how, on more than one occasion, she bet on video game logic and somehow survived.
Attention, Sergeant on deck!
To the surprise of no one who knows a single thing about Chelli Aphra, her exploits and her attitude, she had a pretty traumatic start to life. Born to Corin and Lona Aphra on the second moon of Three-Nitik in 24 BBY, Chelli grew up in a broken home. Her father was a renowned scholar obsessed with the ancient aspects of the Jedi, such as the Ordu Aspectu. Chelli was only 5 when the Great Jedi Purge happened, and her father took it upon himself to find these ancient forgotten aspects to restore the Jedi Order and bring back order to the galaxy. He soon became obsessed with his work, neglecting his family and ruining his relationship with both his wife and daughter. Even as a young child, Chelli figured out that if she wanted her father to pay her attention, she had to pretend to be interested in the Jedi. In secret, however, she disliked them and thought the Sith, whom she'd read about in his books, were way cooler. His wife, meanwhile, was dealing with some major anxiety due to his work. She was rightfully concerned that Corin's work would get them marked as traitors to the Empire. She also hated that he neglected her and their daughter. The final straw came when Corin took Chelli with him on a heist to recover some Jedi-related records from an Imperial facility, risking their daughter's life. At that point, Lona's anxiety and resentment bubbled over, and she left him, taking Chelli with her. Lona moved them to Abraflux, a remote world where they didn't have to interact with another sentient being. Her anxiety seemed to have gotten even worse, and she became even more overbearing and overprotective, smothering her daughter and seeing her intelligence as something that might get her hurt. That quiet life lasted for 2 years, until one day when a band of raiders attacked them. Sent by the Imperial Coalition of Progress to harass worlds into calling upon the Empire's protection, these raiders shot to kill. Lona gave her daughter her blaster and urged her to run, calling on the Empire for help before she died. Later, Imperial scout troopers found Chelli in a ditch. They brought her back to the Empire, where she got a psychological evaluation before being returned to her father. That homecoming proved to be a bit of a disaster. Corin, who hadn't been informed his daughter was on the way, returned home to find it on fire. Chelli had set it aflame to destroy it and his life's work. He managed to put it out while Chelli screamed at him that her mother was dead. As the Imperial psychologist had discerned, Chelli Aphra had issues, and they'd follow her for her entire life. You'd think that, with how her father's obsession had ruined her childhood, Aphra would want to stay as far away from his line of work as she could, but Chelli Aphra lived to be a contrarian, and so she went into the same field of archaeology when she grew up. In university, she studied galactic history and ancient civilizations while pursuing a doctorate degree in archaeology. Her conduct, however, left much to be desired, as she continued to display recklessness, disregard for authority, and straight-up committed blackmail and fraud. To name some of her more insignificant misbehaviors, she once dated 2 people at the same time without them knowing, and also almost got another student expelled on their first day. When the expulsion didn't go through, she continued harassing him for the remainder of their academic time together. However, her worst beef was with one of her professors, Tube Nix, against whom she developed a vendetta. On a fundamental level, she and Tube Nix disagreed on what it meant to be an archaeologist. A normal person might hunker down and go with the flow, but Chelli would openly pick fights with her professor during class time. Eventually, Tubnix tried to get her expelled and banned her from his lectures. Aphra, however, snuck into one and picked another fight with him over the merit of organizing expeditions into ruined areas to find lost artifacts. During this fight, another student, Sana Staros, took her side, and together the two women thoroughly humiliated the tenured professor. Despite this well-documented feud between them, Tubnix still selected Aphra to be his doctoral candidate student. Aphra decided this meant her research was so valuable the professor would overlook their mutual hatred. Convinced she was invaluable to him, she proceeded to make his life hell, like that one time she sat in on one of his undergraduate lectures, sliced into the holoprojector, and made the historical figures on screen make out. Aphra, however, was not invaluable. When her doctoral project failed, she and Tubnix got into an argument. During the fight, Aphra provoked the professor quite openly, and he responded by leading her into a secret vault. In the room, the professor had gathered and subdued several Abyssin symbiotes, a type of mind-controlling parasite that was illegal. He spitefully informed Aphra that he'd never selected her for her merits, but because he hated her deeply, and now he was revealing a secret Aphra would never be able to expose. No one would ever believe her over him. Knowing he was right, Aphra didn't try to expose him to the scientific community. Instead, she enlisted the help of her friend Staros and one of Staros's tech-savvy friends. Together, the three hacked into Tubnix's secret room, stole all the symbiotes without sounding the alarm, and transported them off-world. Aphra then hid the parasites in the empty vault she'd been studying as part of her doctoral thesis, staging a huge discovery. To the scientific community, Aphra had somehow found a vault sealed for millennia that contained dormant, yet alive Abyssin parasites. Her discovery was labelled as the greatest archaeoxenobiology find in history, much to her professor's ear. Aphra proceeded to blackmail Tubnix, threatening to expose him if he didn't award her her doctorate. And so, Aphra graduated with a doctorate in archaeology gained through dubious means. Her following life choices were just as questionable. Sometime in 0BBY, Aphra found herself on Dantooine. She was trying to reactivate and upgrade some Clone Wars-era droidicas, but needed some spare parts that weren't easy to come by. Her search brought her to an abandoned rebel base on Dantooine, but the Imperial presence on the planet soon came across her and took her into custody. Stormtroopers took her back to the new Imperial base and presented her to General Cassio Tage, who interrogated her. During the interrogation, the general mentioned the Death Star and the destruction of Alderaan, which Aphra showed great interest in. Initially, the Imperials had suspected she was a rebel, but soon decided she was just a troublemaker. To avoid any further issues, Tage ordered her execution. While a lone stormtrooper walked her into the woods towards her death, Aphra hatched an escape plan. She distracted the stormtrooper with talks about firing squads before jamming his comm, disarming him, and threatening him with his own weapon. She did eventually send him packing, but the experience had changed her. Not because Aphra feared death, but because she was seeing the Empire in a new light. Remember how we mentioned Aphra thought the Sith were cool? She also happened to think the Empire was pretty good, something that brought order and law to the galaxy. Learning about the destruction of Alderaan, however, changed her views. It was such a senseless act of destruction that it had changed her view of the Empire. Aphra did eventually reactivate and upgrade those droidicas, adding missile launchers to the terrifying droids. She then sold them off to a gang of pirates. Unluckily for them, however, they popped up on Darth Vader's radar, and soon they were eating space dust with the space slugs. Through their computers, Vader found out just who had worked on the droidicas, and he was impressed. And so, the Sith Lord set out to find and recruit her as his secret ally. While Vader looked for her, Aphra was doing work for the droid Gotra, a group of militarized separatist droids that hadn't shut down when the droid shutdown order came at the end of the Clone Wars. She was tasked with retrieving several droid-related weapons technologies, like the 000 personality matrix and the BT-1 assassin droid protocol. Her search eventually led her to an asteroid space station, Quarantine World 2, where the matrix was located. Aboard the space station, she Mission Impossibled her way through the various security protocols. She managed to grab the Matrix, but on her way out, she triggered the alarm. Around her, the facility's defenders swarmed her while the space station began self-destructing. Just as she made her escape, her old nemesis, the student she'd almost gotten expelled, got in her way and took her into custody. That did not last. Minutes later, Darth Vader himself arrived, wiping out her captor's B-2 battle droids. In the confusion of the fight, Aphra turned on her captor and with Vader's help, took back the Matrix and killed her. Aphra's faith in the Empire might have waned, but her support of the Sith had not. Thus, when Darth Vader explained he had hunted her down to offer her a position at his side, she didn't hesitate for a moment. Vader had been unceremoniously demoted by the Emperor and was now gathering private forces to dethrone him, a cause Aphra could get behind. She got to stick it to the Empire and support the Sith at the same time. Excited yet nervous, she worked with Vader to insert the 000 protocol into a 3PO droid, then used the newly awakened 000 to unlock the BT-1 assassin droid, codenamed Blastumek. Aphra surrendered both of these high-tech weapons to Vader's command, believing he was a far more worthy cause to serve than the droid Gotra. And better yet, she had another asset to offer Vader in his time of need, a droid factory on Geonosis where he could build even more forces for his private army. The Gotra had assigned her to find the factory for them, but now she set off for the Genesis system with her new master. It didn't take them long to arrive on Geonosis. They touched down on the red sands of a Clone Wars-era battlefield, where they uncovered something quite curious. A native Geonosian queen, Karina, had survived the Empire's sterilization of the planet and had adopted the portable droid factory. To quote Aphra, the queen was using it as a mechanical womb deep in her subterranean lair, churning out B-1 battle droids modified to look more Geonosian. The Queen viewed these droids as her children, which meant she wasn't going to give them up without a fight. Vader, naturally, didn't balk at the challenge. He stormed in, saber blazing, and began taking out the B-1s without hesitation. Thanks to Aphra's craftiness, the help of 000 and BT, and the Archangel's assistance, they were able to steal the portable droid factory and escape aboard Aphra's ship, factory in hand. With just a few modifications, the factory began producing an army of artificial intelligent BX series droid commandos that would fill the ranks of Vader's growing personal army. Although the heist was successful, Aphra was smart enough to know that Vader would kill her once her usefulness had run out. We mention this because it illustrates just what kind of person Dr. Aphra was. This woman had the thought, brought it up to Vader casually, and then requested that, when the time comes for him to take her life, to please do so with his lightsaber. Not only was she not afraid of death, apart from death via airlocking, but she was outright giddy at the idea of being killed by a Sith's hand. Meanwhile, another cog in Vader's plan began to spin. Black Chrysanthemum, a bounty hunter some of you may remember from the Book of Boba Fett, arrived with the bounty Vader had set in tow, an unnamed scientist. Vader had the man tortured and interrogated until he was successfully identified as Dr. Silo. The team made their way to the Croshank Nebulae in the Outer Rim, where Silo maintained a secret research base protected by a whale fleet, a literal fleet of organic whales modified into spaceships. Aphra and the Sith Lord didn't hesitate in launching an offensive, combining their intelligence and brute force respectfully to force their way into the research base, find its plans, and take out all on-board opposition. As they were wrapping up their objective, Boba Fett reached out with more information on a bounty Vader had placed. The information led them to the Dune Sea of Tatooine, and more specifically, to one moisture farm run by the Lars family. There, Vader revealed to Aphra that the pilot who had destroyed the Death Star had lived there. Only a few weeks ago, the homestead had been attacked. Aphra concluded that, due to the Emperor dissolving the Imperial Senate, that had led to the attack on the pilot's family, prompting him to seek revenge against the Empire. To Aphra, this logic aligned with her new opinion of the Empire, and Vader didn't try to convince her otherwise. While on Tatooine, they scoured the evidence of a fight between the pilot and Fett. Vader then had to return to his duties as the Emperor's second-in-command, but he had a different mission for Aphra that would continue furthering their plans. The mission? Infiltrate an Imperial Arquitans-class light cruiser while it was in transit and liberate a fortune's worth of credits from its vault. The ship was currently returning to the Empire after it had taken out the leader of the Santul Pride, a criminal syndicate based out of the homonymous planet. To complete her mission, Aphra put together a team of 5 bounty hunters, one of whom was Chrysanthemum, and set out for the Anthan system. On the surface, the mission was for the team to get rich. In reality, the funds would all go to funding Vader's vendetta against the Emperor. The only 2 in on the plan were Aphra and Chrysanthemum, who soon became a close conspirator. When the light cruiser exited hyperspace above Anthan Prime, Aphra was ready for it. Detonating explosives that she'd previously planted on a large asteroid, she created an asteroid belt that slowed the cruiser down. 4 of them used the slingshot method to crack the ship's hull open, spilling the millions of credits into space. Some of these were collected with a magnet to satisfy the crew, while the 5th member of the team secretly collected the real objective. He then took Vader's credits to Anthan 13, one of the planet's moons. Their mission was a success. While Vader's forces were growing steadily, the Sith Lord had other tasks for Dr. Aphra to complete. Most of these, as it turns out, were of a more personal nature. Aphra's next mission in Vader's service was tracking down and interrogating Comodex Tarn, a former mortician from the planet of Naboo. With a small droid force by her side, the Doctor stormed the mortician's luxurious villa and took him alive, albeit with some scuff marks. After they made the scene look like a break-in, they interrogated the old man. Observant viewers may have connected the dots already, but if you rolled low on your intelligence check, Tarn had been the mortician in charge of preparing a former queen and Vader's wife for burial. The mortician refused to talk, prompting Aphra to go off on a trauma dump bad enough to make Tarn feel sorry for her, which is how we also feel while making this video. After a little bit of violent persuasion, the likes of which HK-47 would have approved of, Tarn finally revealed that the Queen had indeed given birth to a son before her passing, and that her son had been surrendered to Jedi Masters Yoda and Obi-Wan Kenobi. This information was enough for Vader, who then tasked the Doctor with locating the boy, aka the pilot who had destroyed the Death Star before the Empire's agents did. Her search for Skywalker led her back to Anthan Prime, where she hoped a crime lord contact of hers could procure the information for a fee. To her surprise, the crime lord had already gathered information on Skywalker's whereabouts and was in the process of selling that intel to other nefarious organizations. Using the credits from the decoy heist, Aphra bought the info off the infochant. Skywalker was on Vrogus Vass. Their meeting was cut short when Imperial forces led by Vader himself raided their location. It took everything Aphra had to evade Imperial capture and escape to her ship. Her crime lord contact did not make it out alive, which had naturally been Vader's plan from the start. What Aphra didn't expect was for Vader to board her ship, force choke her, and prepare to kill her. She managed to buy herself more time by revealing she had info on Skywalker's location, but the two left that meeting on rather tense terms. With Vader leading the Imperial forces in a different direction, Aphra was able to make a dangerous escape from Anthan Prime. Later on, she rendezvoused with Vader, revealing that Skywalker was on Vrogus Vass. Seeing her usefulness, Vader left her alive a little longer. Before the Sith Lord departed for the Outer Rim world, Aphra got some new, conflicting information about Skywalker's location. New intel said the Last Jedi was going to fight in a gladiatorial arena on Nar Shaddaa in Gracchus the Hutt's palace. As it turns out, Skywalker had been kidnapped by Gracchus forces and pitted against Congo the Disemboweler, a giant murderous rogwart from Mustafar, as a sick form of entertainment. As one might expect from a woman with her mental faculties as intact as Aphra, She placed a bet against Skywalker, her mission objective prioritizing credits over Vader not slicing her head off. In the end, she lost that bet, since Skywalker was rescued by a team of rebels before the giant Rogwart had the chance to live up to his name. Vader dropped by Nar Shaddaa to reconvene with Aphra, and with new information, they departed for Vrogus Vass. This seemingly abandoned Outer Rim world, as it turns out, wasn't as insignificant as it might have seemed on the surface. Aphra's intelligence revealed there was an ancient Jedi temple on the planet, likely Skywalker's target. Aphra was also able to learn that the Imperial agent sent by Palpatine to find Skywalker had yet to identify him and was unlikely to interfere in their pursuit. With their target within his sight, Vader dropped out of hyperspace above the planet and prepared to make planetfall. However, what he wasn't expecting were the 3 full Rebel squadrons of X-Wings, Red, Blue, and Gold squadrons, who were just chilling in space. A space battle broke out, which Vader assumed to be a setup on Aphra's part to get him killed. Despite his reservations, he refused to back away with his son so close. Soon after, Aphra, who had genuinely not set him up, surprisingly enough lost contact with him. Like any sane person would, she decided to make for the planet where Vader had crash-landed to rescue him and prove her worth to him. This plan went as well as you might think it would. In case it wasn't clear by now, Dr. Chelly Aphra was likely inspired by icons such as Lara Croft or Indiana Jones. She's the kick-ass archaeologist with dope combat skills and tactical knowledge. However, many of her plans are creative, so to speak, and could best be described as video game logic in real life. What she came up with on Vrogus Vass was no exception. After calling on Black Chrysanthemum for help, Aphra sat down and looked at the facts. She was up against 1 Jedi, 1 Leia Organa, 1 Han Solo, and 2 droids, R2-D2 and C-3PO. She managed to touch the Archangel down near the Jedi Temple, and with the use of macro binoculars, she could see Skywalker just walking around. Obviously, engaging him in combat wasn't an option, so instead, she had the brilliant idea of painting 000 gold and making him pretend to be C-3PO. Both droids were the same make, she reasoned, and the similarity would be enough to lull Skywalker into a false sense of safety. Frustratingly enough, her plan worked, at least initially. Golden 000, the newest Dragon Ball Z villain, approached Luke without any difficulty and, once within range, electrocuted him to knock him out. Aphra and BT jumped in to carry their target away, but Han Solo intervened. He and Aphra got into a firefight that ultimately ended with both of them unconscious and Skywalker escaping. Meanwhile, the Imperial agent Aphra had reassured Vader wasn't a threat did, in fact, become a threat, showing up and engaging Vader. Torn between assisting Vader and capturing Skywalker, Aphra was soon overwhelmed and captured, taken prisoner aboard the Millennium Falcon. With her in rebel hands, Vader placed a bounty on her head, dead or alive. The next few weeks of Aphra's life were rather tumultuous. After being interrogated for weeks by Alliance intelligence with no success, Aphra was transported to Sunspot Prison, a penitentiary run by the Alliance to house Imperial prisoners. She was brought to the prison aboard the Vault Cobra by Princess Leia and Staros, her old friend, who had defected and joined the Alliance. Despite succeeding to escape her bonds aboard the ship, Aphra was held at gunpoint and successfully moved onto the prison station. That's when things went a little wonky. Soon after Leia, Staros, and Aphra arrived on Sunspot Prison, it was raided by a rogue rebel agent named Aneb Ray. Ray's goal was to slaughter Imperial prisoners in a bid to make Leia a far more ruthless leader. After the rogue agent's forces tried to kill Aphra, Leia and Staros rescued her and, despite some reservations, armed her so they could fight through the chaos together. The 3 women fought their way through the prison station, eventually reaching the command center to free R2-D2 and C-3PO. From there, the group reached the hangar, where Rey was holding Solo and Skywalker captive. Rey demanded that Leia kill Aphra, the Imperial prisoner, but she refused. Things could have easily gone south had R2-D2 not turned off the prison's gravity, which caused chaos. Aphra used the ensuing commotion to escape, but not before Staros attacked her for abandoning her, and Leia cautioned her that Vader was dangerous. After escaping, Aphra made her way to the Cosmotanic Steps, where BT and 000 found her. Now, amidst everything, Aphra had been thinking. She was, after all, a rather smart woman, and she had enough pieces of the puzzle to figure things out. Skywalker was Vader's son, and the Sith Lord would never allow her to live with that information. When her crew found her, she promised she'd not broken under rebel interrogation. While they trusted her, Black Chrysanthemum, who came to collect on the bounty on her head, did not care. Once more, she was captured, this time brought to Vader's new flagship, the Executor, above Kuwat Drive Yards. This is where the story gets a little convoluted. Once in the Executor's hangar, Aphra gave BT and 000 a priority order to help free her. The three of them and Black Chrysanthemum, who was now helping her, fought their way through the ship's forces. Eventually, they ended up in front of Emperor Palpatine. For some reason we can't explain, Aphra decided that her best move was to detail all her covert missions with Vader to Palpatine to prove her usefulness to the Dark Lord of the Sith. While Palpatine was impressed, which we suppose was likely her goal to begin with, Vader was not, and he unceremoniously threw Aphra into an airlock and defenestrated her into the depths of space. Thankfully for Aphra, Chrysanthemum and her droids were able to save her. With Vader and the Emperor now believing her dead, Aphra had finally freed herself of her self-imposed Sith shackles. With the Sith business behind her, she and her team set off on new adventures that involved less temperamental employers. That said, their exploits were still pretty entertaining. Perhaps unsurprisingly, now that she was no longer Vader's henchman, Aphra decided to make a living combining her love of archaeology and her admiration of the Sith. One of their adventures saw the group traveling to Moraband, hired by the Ithorian Dakonda to recover the ancient Sith artifact, the Sword of Kashun. Surprisingly, Onda actually accompanied the group alongside his Shistuvanan guards. On Moraband, they landed near a Sith temple. Aphra ventured out with BT and two of Onda's Shistuvan guards. Once inside the temple, Aphra warned everyone that there were traps, and indeed there were. At the very first one, Aphra let one of the two Shistuvines trigger it, resulting in the guard being killed before she took out the trap. The remaining guard grabbed her by the throat, but she was able to convince him it had just been an accident. It had not been. From the beginning, Aphra was annoyed at how this mission was playing out. She had the maps and the knowledge to find the sword, but she had needed someone to give her a ship and finance the mission. Ondar had stepped in there, but he was taking the sword as a reward, which cut into Aphra's profits quite steeply. And thus, she decided to double-cross him and take the sword for herself so she could auction it off. As she ventured deeper into the tomb with the remaining Shistuvanan and BT, she instructed 000 to jam communications and kill Ondar and his remaining guards. After some temple exploration, they eventually found the mummified body of a Sith Lord with the Sword of Kashyyyk resting before it. The Shistuvanin was sent to pick up the sword, but the action triggered a trap. An ultrasonic call summoned a Tukatar, an ancient Sith hound, which pursued them. Aphra and her two companions ran with the sword, though they accidentally tripped the Shistuvanan, leaving him to be ripped apart by the tomb guard while they made their escape with the relic. Alas, the mission didn't end on a positive note. When Aphra and BT exited the temple, sword in hand, they found an enraged Ondar glaring them down. The Collector had deactivated 000, and after a short scuffle, managed to take BT and Aphra out as well. When she awoke, her droids were functioning again, but the Collector had left with the sword and his ship, leaving them stranded. Although it's unknown how they escaped Moraband, Aphra did eventually make it back to the Cosmotanic Steps, where her new ship, the Archangel II, was nearing completion. While in the area, she fatally robbed Ulbik Tan, taking an artifact from him. Later, Su Tarth and his bodyguards confronted her, demanding either the artifact or money. Once more, she tried to brute her way out of a confrontation, only to be knocked out. Luckily for Aphra, Chrysanthemum came to her rescue, and she made a bet with Su Tarth. If his bodyguards could defeat the Wookiee, she'd give him double the money. Naturally, the Wookiee won, and Aphra left with the artifact in hand. She took her new ship to Archeo Prime, a floating spire run by the Archaeological Association, where she attempted to sell the artifact. However, she wasn't allowed to. Her past deeds were catching up to her. People had taken notice of her shady discovery back during her doctoral days, and the Archaeological Association was reviewing her doctorate. As if her day wasn't bad enough, Aphra was confronted by her own father, who knew she'd lied about the parasites being in that vault. He tried to convince her to salvage her reputation and doctorate by studying the Ordo Aspectu, one of his lifelong obsessions. Initially, Aphra was quite hostile to the idea, but when she realized she didn't have the nerve to execute her own father no matter how much she hated him, she agreed to work with him to investigate the ancient aspect of the Jedi. The small team traveled to Yavin 4, where Corrin Aphra proved he had been living under a rock, as apparently he had no idea the Massassi Temple was now infested with stormtroopers after the Battle of Yavin 4. Using Chrysanthemum and the droids as distractions, the two Aphras snuck into the temple and placed several Massassi pieces into keyholes, Indiana Jones style, activating the temple. From there, their path led them to the Citadel of Ruhr, the legendary space station fortress that had been the headquarters of the Ordo Aspectu. Together, the two Aphras were able to locate it, despite all odds. Aboard the space station, Corrin focused on studying the remains of the dead Jedi, while Chelly pilfered their lightsabers. The two ventured deeper into the Citadel, looking for information on the immortal Ruhr, a Force-sensitive man who had led the Ordo Aspectu a long time ago. However, as they were looking for the Citadel's logs, Imperial forces stormed the space station looking for them. The two Aphras were left to fend for themselves as their companions abandoned them. Forced deeper into the Citadel, they found the core and the remains of Ruhr, but realized the computer wouldn't work without a crystal. In true Aphra fashion, Chelly looked everywhere for the crystal activator while lambasting her father as the worst parent and spouse of the century. When she finally found a crystal, she used it to activate the Citadel's core, only to be met with the voice of Ruhr, who proved his identity by activating the Citadel's droids. Now, if you've played Portal, what happened next will seem familiar. Ruhr revealed to the two archaeologists that he had copied himself into the computer long ago and now wanted to know everything that had happened. Under threat of torture, the Aphras explained 1,000 years had passed since the Ordo Aspectu had met its demise, a fact which enraged Ruhr. The computer decided that it would get his revenge on the living, starting with the two organics right before him. A fight broke out between the Aphras and the Citadel droids, but Chelly was able to destroy the console with one of her looted lightsabers. A short fight ensued, but the Aphras and Imperials were able to escape the Citadel in one piece. Aphra had stolen one of the Citadel's crystals, which she believed to contain Ruhr's consciousness, and hid it from her father as they parted ways. Shortly after, Aphra got her doctoral degree reinstated and made a killing selling off those stolen lightsabers, learning nothing in the process. She would go on to double-cross many other allies, steal, murder, and generally be a nuisance to everyone who met her for many years to come, including one extremely convoluted adventure that involved her teaming up with Luke Skywalker, betraying him, infecting him with an Abyssin parasite, and pimping him out to be a queen's consort. But that's a story for another day. Scientist, archaeologist, certified nutjob, Chelly Lona Aphra was many things to many people, but overall, she was a badass woman who relied on her sharp wit to save her skin when she took on opponents far beyond her weight class. But what do you think? Is Aphra's story the breath of fresh air we all need from time to time, or are there too many Skywalkers intertwined in her story for it to feel truly independent? Is there another figure you'd like us to talk about from the canon EU? Feel free to let us know in the comments.